It was late autumn in Lincoln, Nebraska, the kind of quiet cold that crept in around the edges of windows and wrapped itself around your bones. The leaves had finished their brilliant fireworks show weeks ago, and now they lay curled and brittle across the sidewalks like forgotten confetti. The town itself was beginning to settle into winter's hush. Streetlights flickered on a little earlier, porch lights stayed lit a little longer, and front yards became empty stages waiting for snow. Evelyn Carter, 23, sat on the edge of a porch swing at her grandfather's house, the only place in town where silence didn't feel like judgment. The faded boards beneath her creaked with every small shift, and a worn blanket lay draped over her lap, her right knee wrapped in a brace under it. The pain had dulled into something constant, no longer sharp enough to shock her, but never gone. It was like grief, quiet, heavy, and deeply personal. She stared out at the cracked sidewalk below the steps, her thoughts looping like film on repeat. She used to run that sidewalk every morning at sunrise, earbuds in, sweat on her brow, chasing dreams she believed hard work alone could catch. But now, that sidewalk might as well be a cliff. The semifinals had been 7 months ago, but the moment of injury lived in her body like a second heartbeat. The leap, the strike, the crowd's roar, and then the pop, the scream, the collapse. In a single second, her future had been rewritten. Torn ACL, fractured tibia, shredded meniscus. The trifecta of athletic doom. She had sat in the ER that night, her best friend Zoe clutching her hand, while the doctor had explained the options. Surgery was the clear choice if she wanted to avoid lifelong pain. But surgery came with a price tag, $45,000. Her parents had frowned, sighed, exchanged glances. Then they said they'd think about it. They thought about it for exactly a week before buying her younger sister Aria a brand new BMW. Evelyn didn't cry when they told her. She didn't scream either. She just nodded, said, okay, and left the room like someone walking out of a burning house, pretending not to notice the smoke. This porch, though, it was different. Her grandfather's house sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood with tall trees and older homes, each with a story. His porch smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and cedarwood, the floorboards grooved by decades of feet coming and going. It was where Evelyn had eaten popsicles as a child, where she'd read books during summer breaks, and where, just last week, her grandfather Henry had pulled a second blanket over her legs without a word and sat beside her until her breathing calmed. Grandpa Henry was in his 70s now, with silver hair and the posture of someone who had never bent to life's unfairness. A retired history teacher, he still wore cardigans with elbow patches and believed in the power of eye contact. He was also the only person who had looked at Evelyn and seen beyond the injury, beyond the brace. You know, he said one evening as he stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of tea, you remind me a bit of your grandmother. Evelyn turned to him, the steam from the tea curling in the cool air. Because I'm stubborn? No, he said, handing her a mug. Because even after everything, you still hope. You still show up. They sipped in silence after that. Evelyn had never known her grandmother. She passed before Evelyn turned 5, but it felt like a compliment all the same. She came to the porch every afternoon that week after painful physical therapy appointments and sleepless nights. It wasn't that her grandfather gave her advice. He didn't offer solutions or quotes from books. He simply made space. Space to be angry. To be sad. To not be okay. And that space changed something in her. One particularly gray afternoon, Evelyn found a letter waiting for her on the swing. Folded carefully, written in her grandfather's steady handwriting. To Evelyn, you are not broken. You are rebuilding. This porch has seen many stories. Some joyful, some painful. But what they all have in common is that they kept going. So will you. Grandpa asterisk. Evelyn folded the note and pressed it to her chest. The weight of it was more powerful than the dozens of texts and platitudes from others over the past months. Because here, in the soft creak of the swing and the warmth of chamomile tea, was something rare, someone who didn't try to fix her. Someone who simply stayed. The pain in her knee hadn't vanished. The betrayal of her parents hadn't healed. Her sister still drove that BMW. But something in Evelyn shifted that day, not a dramatic epiphany, but a quiet, internal nod. A promise to herself that she would find a way. She'd work, she'd save, she'd fight. And until then, she'd come back to the porch. In the heart of a hushed Nebraska town, under the fading light of a November sky, Evelyn sat still and let the quiet hold her. Not to erase what had happened, but to remind her of what still could. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come in a hospital room or with a check from a reluctant parent. Sometimes, healing begins on a porch with a cup of tea and someone who never needed to say, "I love you," out loud, because everything about the way they show up already has. The hallways of Westland State University had a way of amplifying silence at night. Evelyn Carter sat hunched at her tiny desk in the corner of her shared dorm room, lit only by the flickering glow of a cheap desk lamp. The pain in her right knee had bloomed into a familiar throb, syncing with her pulse. She pressed the ice pack harder against the brace and tried to focus on the half-written essay in front of her. American literature, due in 6 hours. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, unmoving. In the other bed, Zoe was asleep, or pretending to be, curled beneath a pile of fleece blankets. The low hum of her white noise machine filled the room, masking nothing. Evelyn's tears slid silently down her face, unannounced, unwelcome, unstoppable. The moment she had feared for months had arrived. The pain was winning. 3 months earlier, she'd started college with her knee in a brace and the kind of grit that only came from years of being told, "You're the strong one." Evelyn had believed she could handle it. Push through. She always had. Work hard enough, suffer long enough, and life would eventually reward her. But that equation had changed the day her parents said no. She had called them in early October, after her third follow-up with Dr. Patel. She'd rehearsed the conversation in her head a dozen times, practiced how she'd frame it as a medical necessity, not a favor. How she'd emphasize the long-term risks, the urgency. She hadn't expected them to cheer or write a check on the spot, but she hadn't expected that, either. "Have you looked into acupuncture?" her mother had asked gently, as if she were suggesting chicken soup for a broken leg. Her father's voice had been less soft. "Do you have any idea what surgeries like that cost?" "Tens of thousands of dollars, Evelyn." She had tried to reason. "I've already talked to the insurance. They'll cover most. What I need help with is the copay. It's $45,000. If I wait, it could mean permanent damage." There was silence. Then the tone that always followed bad news. "We just can't take on that kind of expense right now." A week later, they surprised Aria with a BMW. That was the moment the illusion shattered. For years Evelyn had buried the favoritism under logic, under the myth that being the responsible one meant she didn't need help, didn't need them. But this wasn't about independence anymore. This was about walking. This was about the rest of her life. And she wasn't worth it. That night, after the call, Evelyn had cried in the bathroom. Zoe sat with her on the cold tile, holding her hand and not saying a word. The next day, Evelyn went to the campus job board. She took extra hours at the coffee shop across from the student union, 6-hour shifts on her feet, even though she had to sit down between customers when the pain became unbearable. She joined 2 clinical research trials, one for a sleep study and one for a blood pressure medication. She donated plasma twice a month, ignoring the dizziness that followed. She even tutored 3 freshmen in calculus, meeting them at the library on nights when she could barely climb the stairs. Every dollar she made went into a locked savings account labeled surgery. She watched the balance grow, painfully slowly. $800. $1,100. $1,425. At that rate, she'd be able to afford the surgery by the time she turned 30. And she might never walk without a limp again. It was a bitter kind of math. Late one night, in the lull between midterms and mental collapse, Evelyn found herself on a bench outside the dorm building. The campus was hushed, blanketed in the heavy stillness that only came after midnight. The trees were bare now, and the wind that wound its way through them felt like fingers tracing old wounds. She sat there in her oversized hoodie, crutches propped beside her, staring out at nothing. "Liv." Zoe's voice was groggy and concerned. She had followed her out barefoot, holding 2 mugs of peppermint tea. "You okay?" Evelyn didn't answer for a while. She just looked up at the sky. The stars in Nebraska were clearer in winter, sharp and cold and distant. "I thought I could outwork this," she said finally. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, sacrificed enough, something would shift." Zoe handed her the tea. "You're doing everything you can." "But it's not enough," Evelyn whispered. "And the worst part is, they could help. They just don't want to." Zoe sat beside her, pulling her knees to her chest. "I hate them for that," she said. "And I don't say that lightly." "I don't hate them," Evelyn replied, though it surprised her how close she was to meaning it. "I just feel disposable." There was a long pause. Then Zoe said quietly, "You should call your grandfather." Evelyn turned to her, startled. "No. I can't." "Why not?" "Because I know what he'll do. He'll step in. He'll pay for it. He'll take care of it like he always does. And then what? My parents will hate me for dragging him into it. They'll say I manipulated him." Zoe met her eyes. "Liv, you're in pain. You're limping through your life to protect people who already chose not to protect you." That cut through something. And Evelyn knew she was right. 2 days later, Evelyn stood on the porch of her grandfather's house, clutching a manila folder full of medical reports and insurance estimates. He opened the door in his usual sweater vest and corduroy slacks, his face lighting up in surprise. "Livy," he exclaimed. "What a good surprise." Evelyn didn't say anything at first. She just stepped inside, sat down on the familiar couch, and opened the folder. "I need your help," she said. She told him everything. Every detail. Every number. Every moment of quiet betrayal. Henry Carter didn't interrupt. His hands were folded, his brow furrowed, his eyes unblinking. When she finished, he stood and walked to the kitchen. He returned with a checkbook. "No," Evelyn said quickly. "That's not why I came. I didn't come here for money." He looked at her, calm and steady. "No, Livy. You came for help. And this is me helping." She started to cry. It wasn't a dramatic cry. Not sobs or screams, just tears, hot and steady, running down her cheeks and falling into her lap like raindrops no one noticed. Henry sat beside her and pulled her into a quiet embrace. "You're not a burden," he said into her hair. "You're not asking for anything you don't deserve." Evelyn held on to him like a lifeline, because she realized that sometimes the turning point in a person's life wasn't a dramatic explosion or a passionate monologue. Sometimes, it was just someone believing you were worth saving when you'd almost stopped believing it yourself. Evelyn Carter hadn't planned on coming home for Christmas. She had told herself that staying in her near-empty campus apartment would be easier, that watching old movies with Zoe and microwaving soup felt more like family than anything waiting for her at her childhood home. But when her grandfather called the week before Christmas, asking gently if she'd be there, something inside her softened. "You don't have to come for them," he said. "Just come for me. We'll sit on the porch and complain about fruitcake. You know, traditions." So she packed a small bag, braved the icy roads of Lincoln in her 8-year-old Honda, and tried not to think about how much her knee ached with every clutch press. The house looked the same. A wreath on the red door, white lights twinkling in perfect symmetry across the eaves. It smelled like cinnamon and vanilla when she stepped inside, a scent that once meant joy and now made her feel like an outsider in a story that used to include her. She was greeted by her mother's warm voice, her father's distracted wave, and Aria's high-pitched squeal from the living room. "Evelyn, you're just in time." Evelyn forced a smile, adjusted the strap of her bag, and stepped into the living room, her eyes catching on the gleam of something metallic and blue just outside the window. Her father clapped his hands together with the same performative excitement he once used to announce Christmas scavenger hunts when they were kids. "Let's go outside, everyone. We saved the big surprise until you arrived." The air was crisp and sharp with cold. Evelyn followed them down the porch steps slowly, careful with her knee. Her breath fogged in front of her, white clouds puffing into the night. The snow crunched beneath her boots. And then she saw it. There in the driveway, beneath the soft glow of the overhead garage light, sat a brand new BMW. Deep navy blue, polished like glass, topped with an enormous red bow. The kind you see in commercials. The kind you don't forget. She stopped walking. Aria gasped in delight. "Is this for real?" This is really mine. Her parents beamed. You mentioned wanting something safer than your Civic, her dad said. We figured it was time. Arya squealed again and ran toward the car, pulling open the door and sliding into the leather seat as though she were slipping into a throne. Evelyn's chest tightened. Her fingertips went cold despite the gloves. She turned to her parents slowly. How much? She asked, voice calm but low. Her dad blinked. What? The car. How much did it cost? There was a pause. Her mother stepped in. Well, it was a year-end deal. Great financing. How much? Her father's voice dipped. About 65. The number echoed in her head. Not just the cost, but what it represented. The surgery she needed was $45,000. They had said no. Said it was too expensive. Said times were tight. And yet, you bought her a car, Evelyn said, voice trembling now, for $20,000 more than the surgery I begged you for. Her mother reached out instinctively. Evelyn, don't what? She snapped. Don't ruin Arya's moment? Is that what this is? Is it her moment again? The snow was falling now, soft and silent, but the air between them had turned to glass. You told me you couldn't afford to help me, Evelyn continued. You told me to try acupuncture. You said you were making sacrifices. Was this the sacrifice? Me? Her father's jaw tightened. It's not as simple as you're making it. No, it's exactly that simple, she said, voice rising. I've been dragging this leg around for a year. I've been working until I can't feel my feet, giving blood, skipping meals to save every penny, and you bought Arya a luxury car. Arya stepped out of the vehicle, uncertain now. I didn't know they said no to you. Yes, you did, Evelyn said. You just didn't care. Her sister flinched. Evelyn turned back to her parents. You had the money. You just didn't see me as worth spending it on. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but Evelyn didn't wait for the excuses. She turned, limped back up the porch, her boots slipping slightly on the snow-dusted step, and grabbed her bag from the foyer. Her dad followed. Where are you going? Evelyn, it's Christmas. She turned at the door, shaking with a mix of cold and fury. I'd rather spend Christmas alone than spend one more minute pretending this family gives a damn about me. He reached for her arm. Don't be dramatic. She pulled back. Don't be a coward. And with that, she stepped into the cold night and shut the door behind her. The drive back to campus was slow and treacherous. Snow slicked the roads, and her headlights illuminated flurries that looked like static against the dark. She didn't cry. Not then. Not when she reached the parking lot. Not even when she stepped back into the apartment with frozen hands and a heart too heavy to lift. Zoe was waiting on the couch in flannel pajamas, a mug of cocoa in hand. They bought her the car, Evelyn said, monotone. Zoe stood slowly. What? A BMW, $65,000. It was sitting in the driveway. With a bow. Her voice cracked. Merry Christmas, right? Zoe didn't speak. She just wrapped Evelyn in a hug so tight, it nearly broke her. It wasn't until much later, when the apartment was quiet and she sat with her brace elevated on a pillow, that Evelyn finally let the tears come. They were silent and slow. The kind that didn't feel like weakness, but like release. She realized then that her anger wasn't just about the car, or the money, or the unfairness. It was about the choice. Her parents had chosen who mattered, and it wasn't her. And yet, somewhere in the middle of that grief, a new truth began to take shape. She would no longer fight for a seat at a table that only served love to those who didn't earn it. She would build her own. The coffee shop was chaos, exactly how Evelyn Carter preferred it. There was comfort in the movement, the noise, the predictability of orders shouted above steam wands and espresso shots. It was easier to focus on oat milk and caramel drizzle than on the pain that pulsed with every step she took. Easier to hide in a whirlwind than sit still long enough to feel everything falling apart. It was a Friday afternoon, and the line curled out the door. Finals week. Caffeine was currency. Evelyn moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, though her limp had worsened, her steps now short and uneven. Her coworkers noticed but said nothing. They'd stopped asking weeks ago when her response was always the same. I'm fine. Just tired. She wasn't tired. She was exhausted. She wasn't fine. She was breaking. Her knee burned, sharp, unrelenting pain that had climbed from nuisance to crisis over the past few weeks. But she needed the money. Every shift counted. Every tip brought her closer to the impossible $45,000 mark. So she kept moving, ignoring the warnings, swallowing ibuprofen like candy, numb in every way but physically, until her body finally gave out. It happened so fast it didn't feel real. She was carrying a tray of clean mugs from the dishwasher, her eyes on the timer for the espresso shot, her foot half slipping on a wet patch of floor when it happened, her knee buckled, the tray shattered, and Evelyn collapsed to the tile. The pain was white-hot, blinding. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her throat locked as agony shot up her leg and back down into her toes like electricity. She could hear her own breath, ragged and uneven, and the distant sound of ceramic breaking all around her. Someone called her name. Distant. Muffled. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Keith, the manager, knelt beside her, his hands trembling. Don't move, Evelyn. Just stay still. Help's coming. She shook her head violently. No ambulance. Can't afford. You don't get to choose that right now. Zoe's voice cut through the noise, firm and afraid at the same time. She had been studying in the corner booth. She had seen it all. She was already pulling out her phone, dialing. Evelyn passed out before the paramedics arrived. She woke up in the emergency room, the world dim and distant. Her leg was elevated, her knee wrapped in something cold and immobilizing. The smell of antiseptic and soft beeping filled the space. Zoe sat beside the bed, face pale, hands clasped in her lap. Hey, she said quietly. You're okay. You're at mercy, General. Evelyn tried to sit up and winced. What happened? You felt. Your knee gave out. Like, completely. The doctor says the damage is worse now. A lot worse. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. I told them this would happen. Zoe didn't respond. She reached out and gently held her hand. Moments later, Dr. Mercer, the orthopedic surgeon on call, entered the room. A man in his 40s with tired eyes and a clipboard, he greeted them softly and pulled up her scans. Ms. Carter, he began, professional but not unkind, the damage to your knee is severe. The ACL is fully torn, the meniscus is now shredded, and the tibial plateau fracture has worsened due to the stress. I'm going to be direct with you. Without surgery, soon you are facing permanent disability. You're 23. You could end up with the mobility of someone twice your age. Zoe's grip on Evelyn's hand tightened. What if I do get surgery? Evelyn asked, voice raw. Dr. Mercer nodded. Then there's hope. A good chance, even, that you can regain most of your function, though the delay has reduced our odds a bit. Still, it's the best path forward. He paused. But it has to happen quickly. Evelyn looked away. I can't afford it. We'll have someone from financial services come talk to you, he said gently. There are options. But I want you to understand, this isn't cosmetic. This isn't optional. It's urgent. He left the room quietly. Zoe leaned forward. You have to call them. Evelyn stared at the ceiling. They'll just say the same thing. They'll pretend to care. Then say no. You still have to try. Evelyn reached for her phone with a trembling hand. They answered on the third ring. Evelyn, her mother's voice, cheerful. Hi, honey. How's? I'm in the hospital, she interrupted. My knee collapsed today. It's really bad. There was silence. Then a soft, oh, honey. They say I need surgery immediately. That if I don't, I could lose mobility forever. More silence. Then her father came on the line. How much is it going to cost? He asked, not unkindly but flatly. $45,000. With insurance. I know it's a lot. But, please. I need help. The line went quiet again. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, holding her breath like a child hoping for a miracle. Finally, her father spoke. Evelyn, you know we've already stretched ourselves this year. Between Aria's college and the car. She doesn't need that car. Evelyn shouted, startling Zoe. I needed surgery. You said you couldn't afford it. But you had money all along. You just didn't want to spend it on me. Her mother cut in, flustered. Evelyn, don't be emotional. We're just trying to do our best. Your best is leaving me broken while you give her luxury. Don't twist this into something it's not, her father said coldly. I'm not twisting anything, Evelyn said, her voice sharp with betrayal. You chose her. Over and over. And now you'll have to live with that. She ended the call. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. Zoe was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling your grandfather. No, Evelyn said weakly. Don't drag him into this. He loves you. You're not dragging him into anything. He'd want to know. She dialed anyway. Henry Carter arrived just before dawn. Evelyn woke to find him sitting beside her, hands folded, eyes watching her with a quiet intensity. I should have been told sooner, he said, his voice even but tight. You never should have faced this alone. Evelyn didn't speak. Her throat closed with emotion. He reached for her hand. We're going to fix this, Livy. I'll take care of it. The surgery. Everything. She shook her head. You don't have to. I want to, he interrupted gently. You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. You are my granddaughter, and you matter. Her tears came quickly. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt it. Really felt it. That she was seen. The morning light filtered through the blinds in soft, golden strips, making Evelyn Carter's hospital room feel warmer than it was. She sat propped up against pillows, her knee elevated, wrapped in layers of medical gauze and silence. The night had passed in waves, pain, dreams, voices, memory. But the clearest thing she remembered was her grandfather's hand wrapped around hers and the steady, unshakable promise in his voice. We're going to fix this. Now, as the sun rose over Lincoln and the world outside moved on, Evelyn felt like time inside the room had slowed down, intentionally, gently. Like the universe had finally carved out a quiet place for the truth to land. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Not hurried, not uncertain, measured. Determined. The door opened. Grandpa Henry stepped in first, wearing a crisp wool coat despite the warmth of the hospital. Behind him were Evelyn's parents, Robert and Linda Carter, and the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Mercer. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The tension was palpable. Even the beeping monitors seemed to hesitate. Evelyn braced herself. Good morning, Dr. Mercer began, professional as ever. We're here to go over Evelyn's condition and treatment options, just so everyone's on the same page. He opened a file and cleared his throat. Evelyn has a full ACL rupture, advanced meniscus tearing, and a worsening tibial plateau fracture. In plain terms, her knee is structurally collapsing. If we don't perform surgery within the next week, she faces irreversible damage. Permanent disability isn't a risk, it's a certainty. He paused. With the surgery, there's still hope for near-complete recovery. But timing is now critical. Silence. Then Grandpa Henry stepped forward, resting both hands on the end of Evelyn's bed. Thank you, doctor, he said, his voice calm but with steel underneath. That's all I needed to hear. Now, if you'll give us a few minutes, I'd like to speak with my family alone. Dr. Mercer gave Evelyn a supportive nod and quietly left the room. What followed was not an explosion. It was something quieter, more dangerous. A reckoning. Grandpa turned to Robert and Linda and spoke evenly. You told your daughter you couldn't afford to help her. Robert shifted, bristling. Dad, this isn't the place. It's exactly the place, Henry said sharply. Because that lie, that choice, it led us here. He took a folded paper from his coat pocket and placed it on the bedside table. I called Martin this morning, he continued, referring to the family's financial advisor. He confirmed what I suspected. Between your savings, Aria's wedding fund, and your investment portfolio, you're sitting on over $250,000 in liquid assets. Linda gasped. You had no right. I had every right, he snapped, because I watched your daughter collapse in front of a dozen witnesses yesterday. And I watched you shrug off her pain like it was an inconvenience. He looked directly at his son. You chose a car for Aria over surgery for Evelyn. Robert's face reddened. It's not that simple. It is, Evelyn said, her voice low but unwavering. It really is. She looked between them. Her parents. Two people she had spent most of her life trying to earn love from. Two people who never said it unless it was accompanied by conditions. I begged you, she said. I showed you the scans. I gave you the doctor's number. And you still said no. Her mother stepped forward, eyes glossy. Evelyn, honey, we were trying to balance everything. I wasn't on the list, Evelyn cut in. I've never been on the list. The room fell silent again. And then Grandpa spoke. I'm paying for the surgery. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Finality. Robert opened his mouth, but Henry raised a hand. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you. It's scheduled for Tuesday morning. Everything is handled. Linda looked away, ashamed. Robert stared at the floor. But more than that, Henry continued, I want you both to think very carefully about the cost of what you've already done. He turned back to Evelyn. I'm staying through recovery. We'll do physical therapy together. You'll come stay with me. We'll take it one step at a time. Evelyn blinked back tears. You don't have to. I want to, he said, his voice softening. And not just because I love you, but because you deserve this, Livy. Not because you earned it. Not because you worked harder. But because you're human. You're hurting. And that should have been enough. Her mother cried then, truly cried. The kind of cry that comes not from guilt, but from the slow, painful realization that you've spent years facing the wrong direction. I don't know how we got here, she whispered. I really don't. Henry looked at her, eyes no longer angry, just sad. You didn't look close enough. That's all it takes sometimes. Evelyn turned away from them, overwhelmed. But Grandpa gently reached for her hand. This is your moment now, he said. Not to break, but to begin. Later, as the room emptied, Evelyn sat alone with Henry. The nurse had dimmed the lights. The world outside the window was quiet. Fresh snow dusted the hospital roof, untouched and glowing in the orange hue of sunrise. You didn't have to fight for me, she said. Henry smiled softly. I didn't fight for you, Livy. I stood beside you while you fought. There's a difference. She let that sink in. For the first time in a long time, she felt like something was lifting. The pain in her knee remained. But the weight in her chest, that bone-deep ache of being unseen, started to ease. Not because the past had been erased, but because someone had chosen her. Clearly, loudly, publicly. And that, more than anything, had the power to heal. The sun streamed gently through the wide hospital window as Evelyn Carter opened her eyes to the hushed world of recovery. Her throat was dry, her limbs heavy with anesthesia, and her knee, though tightly braced and bandaged, felt somehow different. Not better, but stabilized, contained. Like a storm that had passed, leaving behind damage, yes, but also clarity. The surgery had taken 4 hours. A full ACL reconstruction, meniscus repair, and internal fixation of the tibial plateau. Dr. Mercer had warned her the road ahead would be long and brutal. But she was no stranger to pain. What she hadn't expected was the strange stillness that followed, the quiet that settled not only over her body but within it. Grandpa Henry sat beside her bed, reading a worn paperback. He looked up as she stirred, his face softening into a smile that made her feel 5 years old again. Safe, protected, worthy. You're awake, he said. I made it, she rasped. He chuckled. Told you. Tough as nails, this one. She blinked against the light, her eyes adjusting slowly, and realized just how much had changed since the last time she lay in a hospital bed. Then she was alone, waiting for parents who showed up 2 hours late, smelling faintly of garlic bread and excuses. Now she had Henry, who hadn't left, who never would. The first week of recovery was brutal. Physical therapy began the day after surgery, gentle movement, they called it. But to Evelyn, it felt like being reassembled from the inside out. She grit her teeth through every stretch, every bend. More than once, she cried, not from the pain itself, but from what it represented. The distance she still had to go. the slowness of healing, the fragility of hope. And every day Grandpa Henry was there, driving her to appointments, holding her hand through the worst of it, cooking scrambled eggs at 6 a.m. when nausea made anything else unbearable. "You're allowed to hate this," he told her once, after a particularly grueling session. "But hating it doesn't mean you're not making progress." She leaned on that truth heavily. One day, about 3 weeks post-surgery, as she sat on Henry's back porch with her leg propped up and a book half-read in her lap, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Only, it wasn't the BMW. It was a beat-up Honda Civic. Evelyn blinked in disbelief. The engine shut off, and Arya stepped out. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and she wore jeans and an oversized hoodie. No designer purse in sight, no makeup, no carefully curated charm. She walked slowly, as if unsure her presence was welcome. Evelyn sat up straighter, uncertain whether to brace for an apology or a confrontation. "Hey," Arya said, standing just inside the gate. "Can I come in?" Henry stepped out from the kitchen at that moment, drying his hands. He opened the door wider. "You're always welcome here." Arya walked over and sat at the edge of the bench opposite Evelyn, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. Evelyn stared, then finally asked, "Where's the BMW?" Arya let out a breath. "I sold it." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because it didn't feel right anymore," Arya said quietly. "After what happened. After what I let happen." There was a long pause. Only the sound of wind in the trees and the distant hum of cicadas. "I knew about the surgery," Arya continued. "The night Mom and Dad told you no, I overheard them. They said it was too much, that you'd figure something out, like always." "I didn't say anything." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I wanted that car so badly," Arya said. "I told myself it wasn't connected, that it was a separate thing. But deep down I knew what it meant." Evelyn didn't speak, waiting. "So I sold it," Arya said. "I used part of the money for tuition. I used to start therapy." That caught Evelyn off guard. "Therapy?" Arya nodded, eyes wet but focused. "Turns out, being the golden child comes with its own baggage. I've been coasting my whole life, getting what I wanted, avoiding what I didn't. But I never learned how to be accountable, or how to see past my own reflection. That's changing now." Evelyn looked down at her brace, then back at her sister. "You know," she said slowly, "for a long time, I thought you were the problem." "I was," Arya replied. "But so were they. And I let them. I benefited from their favoritism, and I told myself it was okay because you were stronger. You always looked like you didn't need help." "I did," Evelyn whispered. "I really did." "I know," Arya said. "I'm sorry." Evelyn believed her. Not because the words were perfect, but because for once they weren't rehearsed. Over the next few weeks, something subtle began to shift. Arya started showing up, not just with apologies, but with groceries, with rides to therapy when Henry had appointments of his own. She asked questions she'd never bothered to ask before. "How's the pain today? What movement is hardest? What's your next goal?" The resentment Evelyn had carried for years didn't disappear overnight. But it loosened. And in its place grew something unexpected: understanding. Healing, she realized, wasn't just physical. It wasn't linear. And it wasn't quiet. Sometimes it looked like sweat and tears on a therapy mat. Sometimes it looked like your little sister pulling weeds in your grandfather's garden just to say, "I'm still learning. But I'm here." One afternoon, 6 weeks after the surgery, Evelyn took her first unassisted steps across the porch. No crutches. No brace. Just trembling legs, cautious hope, and the familiar sound of Henry's proud cheer behind her. "You're doing it," he said, eyes glassy. "You're really doing it." She smiled, breathless. One step at a time. It was a Tuesday in late April when Evelyn Carter realized she could finally walk across campus without thinking about it. No limp. No brace. No calculated timing between classes. She simply looked. The air smelled like blooming magnolia and fresh-cut grass, and the sunlight spilled through the trees with a golden calm that reminded her of early mornings on Grandpa Henry's porch. She paused by the student union building and let herself feel it, the moment. Her feet planted firmly on the pavement, her heart not racing from pain but peace. It had been nearly 6 months since her surgery. 6 months since the rupture of her knee, her family, and the illusion that being quiet and dutiful would someday earn her love. And yet here she was, not just walking but moving forward. Inside the student union, room 213 had become her sanctuary. It had started small, a notice on a bulletin board. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family? Let's talk. Evelyn didn't expect much. Maybe 1 or 2 students. Maybe just Zoe out of loyalty. But that first week, 8 people showed up. The next week, 12. Now, on any given Thursday, over 20 students squeezed into room 213. They brought their stories, their silence, their unspoken hurts. The girl whose brother's addiction consumed all her parents' attention. The boy who was the afterthought child. The non-binary student whose parents only saw the sibling they used to be. And Evelyn, who once believed that working twice as hard would make her half as loved. She called it the unseen space. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't formal. But it was real. They shared more than pain. They shared laughter to small victories, milestones. The first time someone said no to a family obligation. The courage to apply for an internship despite being told they weren't that type. The decision to forgive, but with boundaries. I thought I was the only one, someone would always say. And every time, Evelyn smiled gently and replied, "You're not." Her family was changing too. Slowly. Unevenly. Honestly. After the surgery, her parents came around more often, not out of guilt, but because they began to understand that presence required effort. Linda started reading books on emotional intelligence. Robert, her distant, often unreachable father, began calling her once a week just to ask about physical therapy. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences and moments of backsliding. But there was effort. There was acknowledgement. There were the words Evelyn had waited a lifetime to hear. "We were wrong. We're sorry. We want to do better." She didn't know if she would ever trust them completely. But she no longer carried the weight of needing to. Because something had shifted, not in them, but in her. She no longer needed their validation to believe in her own worth. The most unexpected change came in her relationship with Arya. Once symbols of each other's resentment, the sisters had begun to talk. Really talk. Sometimes it happened during walks around Grandpa's garden. Other times on long drives to campus together. Arya started asking deeper questions, not just, "How are you feeling?" but "What does support look like for you?" She didn't always get it right, but she tried. And that, Evelyn had learned, was everything. During one group meeting in the unseen space, Evelyn had shared a truth that left the room in heavy silence. "Forgiveness," she said, "isn't saying what happened was okay. It's saying, I'm done letting it define who I become." A student named Miguel had raised his hand and added, "So it's like reclaiming the story?" Evelyn smiled. "Exactly." That spring, Evelyn stood in front of a packed auditorium as the keynote speaker for the university's annual Mental Health and Wellness Week. She wore a simple navy dress, her knee hidden beneath fabric, no longer in a brace. Her heart thudded in her chest, not with fear, but with purpose. She stepped up to the mic and looked out at the students, staff, and faculty gathered before her. "I used to think pain was proof of failure," she began. "That if something hurt, it meant I wasn't strong enough. But pain is not weakness. It's a signal, the truth, a call to attention." She paused, steady. "For years, I told myself if I just worked harder, stayed quiet, didn't need too much, I'd earn love. I didn't realize that love that must be earned isn't love at all. It's performance. And I was done performing." She shared her story. The injury. The rejection. The BMW. The collapse. She talked about Henry's unwavering support. About therapy. About Arya's shift. And about room 213. She ended with this. "We all carry stories shaped by the people who raised us. Some are soft and warm. Others are sharp and unfinished. But we get to write the rest. One conversation, one boundary, one act of self-trust at a time." And we're never as alone as we think. The room rose in applause. Not thunderous, not showy, but long, sustained, believing. Later that week, back at Grandpa Henry's house, Evelyn sat on the porch swing with a mug of mint tea. The spring breeze teased her hair, and wind chimes tapped their gentle song. Henry rocked beside her, a crossword puzzle in his lap. "You were brilliant," he said. "I was terrified," she replied. He chuckled. "That's usually when we say the most honest things." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset smear orange and lavender across the Nebraska sky. Then Henry added, "You've turned pain into purpose, Livy. That's rare. That's brave." Evelyn leaned back and let the words settle. For a long time, she had wondered whether the scars, emotional and physical, would ever feel like something more than reminders. But now, she saw them differently. Not as proof of what was broken, but proof of what had been rebuilt. In the world Evelyn lived in now, healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering with gentleness. Seeing the whole picture, flaws, fractures, and all, and still choosing to walk forward. She had learned to walk again. But more than that, she had learned to stand, for herself, and now for others. And in the room she'd built, week after week, for people who once felt invisible, she had made something visible, something powerful, something that could never be taken away. The first time Evelyn Carter wrote her story down, it was early morning, before sunrise, before birdsong. Just her, a mug of coffee cooling beside her notebook, and the quiet that only comes after months of emotional noise. She sat at the wooden desk in her grandfather's study, the window open just enough to let in the smell of spring dew. Outside, the world hadn't fully woken. Inside, she finally had space to breathe. It had been nearly a year since the surgery. Nearly a year since her knee collapsed in a cafe, her life came undone, and her family's carefully curated illusions shattered in a sterile hospital room. And now, she was walking again, without fear, without pain. But more importantly, she was living again, without asking for permission. That morning, Evelyn wasn't writing for class or a scholarship. She was writing for herself. For the girl who had once whispered apologies in between achievements, afraid that asking for help made her weak. For the young woman who spent years mistaking silence for strength. She opened her journal to a blank page, breathed in and began. "What I know now. Family is not always fair. Sometimes, they hold expectations so tightly that they forget you're human. Sometimes, they give more love to the child who asks louder or breaks more things or simply looks more like themselves. Sometimes, they fail you, not out of malice, but out of blindness, fear, or old stories they never bothered to rewrite. For a long time, I believed I had to earn everything. Affection, attention, help. I thought being the strong one meant I wasn't allowed to fall. I thought being capable meant I shouldn't need anyone. I was wrong. Being strong doesn't mean never asking. It means knowing when to ask, who to ask, and letting go of the people who never show up. What happened to me, being denied care, being told, "We can't afford it," only to watch a brand new car appear in the driveway, was painful. But it was also clarifying. It taught me this. Real love shows up when it matters. Not in words. In actions. The people who love you may not always be the ones you were born to. Sometimes, they're friends who sit with you on bathroom floors. Sometimes, they're grandfathers who drive across counties and write checks not out of obligation, but out of fierce, steady love. Sometimes, they're even siblings who finally stop pretending not to notice and start trying to grow. The most important thing I've learned is that I don't have to accept the love I was first given as the only love I deserve. I can build something different. I have built something different. I've learned that boundaries are not walls, they're bridges. They let the right people cross and keep the wrong ones out. And I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with grace instead of pain. I don't carry anger anymore. Not because I've forgotten what was done, but because I've stopped carrying the weight of what was not given. I've stopped apologizing for needing things. I've stopped shrinking in rooms where I was taught to be small. And most of all, I've stopped waiting to be chosen. Because I choose myself now. Every single day. Evelyn sat back, her fingers resting softly against the cover of the journal. She stared out the window at the garden below, the lilacs blooming along the fence, the faint hum of bees rising with the sun. This wasn't just reflection. It was a reckoning. A year ago, she had begged for help from the people who should have offered it freely. They didn't, and she'd nearly broken because of it. But here, in the quiet glow of morning light, she finally accepted something crucial. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is save yourself. Not because you don't need others, but because waiting too long for someone else to save you can cost you everything. Later that day, she met Zoe for lunch. They sat at their usual spot under the oak trees by the student union, Evelyn's crutches now replaced by a soft cane she only used on stairs. Zoe handed her a sandwich and smiled. "You look lighter." "I feel lighter," Evelyn replied. "Did something happen?" "I wrote it all down," she said. "Everything I've learned. Everything I didn't know I needed to say." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Like therapy on paper?" "Exactly," Evelyn laughed. "Except cheaper and with worse handwriting." They ate in silence for a while, students passing around them, birds chattering above. It was just another weekday. But to Evelyn, it felt like the end of a season, and the beginning of one she had chosen for herself. Zoe leaned back on the bench. "You know what I admire about you?" "What?" "You never let what they didn't give you become the reason you stopped giving to others." Evelyn blinked. That truth hit deep. "I guess, once you know how it feels to be invisible," she said slowly, "you never want anyone else to feel that way again." That evening, back in room 213, Evelyn opened the group meeting with something new. She read aloud from her journal, the part about choosing herself. No one spoke for a long time afterward. Then, one of the newest members, a soft-spoken sophomore named Kiara, whispered, "I needed that. I needed to know it's okay to stop waiting." Evelyn nodded. "It is. You don't have to wait for their permission. You're already enough. Right now. As you are." In the quiet of her own becoming, Evelyn Carter found something stronger than validation. She found her voice. And from it she helped others find theirs. Not by being perfect. Not by never falling. But by standing up again, and leaving the door open behind her. The lights dimmed gently across the auditorium as the last of the attendees settled into their seats. Outside, spring had just tipped into summer, and the soft hum of life, birds, distant lawnmowers, laughter from the quad, filtered faintly through the glass panels. Inside, there was a different kind of hush. The kind that comes when something real is about to be shared. Evelyn Carter sat in the front row, a program folded neatly in her lap, her hair tucked behind her ears, and a calm strength in her posture that hadn't been there a year ago. Her knee, once a battlefield of pain and quiet despair, was healed now. Not perfect, but hers again. And today wasn't about pain anymore. It was about purpose. She glanced down at the program. Westland University Annual Forum on Healing and Resilience. Keynote, Aria Carter, Breaking the Cycle, Choosing to Change. The moment Evelyn read her sister's name in print, she had felt a strange flutter in her chest. Not fear. Not pride, exactly. But the kind of tremble you feel when something unfinished is finally being written. The MC walked to the podium and introduced Aria with a soft voice and kind eyes. Then, to the quiet applause of a full house, Aria stepped onto the stage. No spotlight. No dramatics. Just Aria, wearing a simple white blouse and navy pants, her hair in a low bun, and a small note card trembling slightly in her hand. Evelyn held her breath. Aria cleared her throat. "I spent most of my life believing I was the lucky one." Her voice was clear. Measured. "I was the baby of the family. The one who got forgiven before I said sorry. The one who got things without having to explain why I deserved them. And the truth is, I stopped asking questions about fairness a long time ago. Because when you're the one who benefits, silence is easy." She looked down at the card, then back up again. "But last year I watched my sister fall. Not just physically, but into a kind of pain I can't even imagine. And I didn't say a word. I knew she needed help. I knew what our parents had done. And I said nothing." There was a pause. In the front row, Evelyn didn't move. That silence, Arya said, voice trembling now, cost me more than I realized. It cost me a relationship I never truly tried to build. It cost me respect. It cost me myself. Someone in the crowd coughed softly. Arya smiled faintly. I'm here because I'm still learning. Because I've started therapy. Because I sold the car. Because I've asked and am still asking how to show up differently. But more than that, I'm here because I wanted to say this in public, where I once hid in private. I was wrong. And I am sorry. Evelyn, thank you for surviving what I turned away from. And thank you for forgiving me long before I understood how to deserve it. The room was still. And then Evelyn did something simple, something quiet. She stood. Arya saw her. And in that moment, no words passed. No dramatic hugs. No movie scene tears. Just two sisters, both standing now. Both healing. Later, outside the auditorium, the sun poured across the stone steps where students lingered, their conversations low and thoughtful. Evelyn found a shaded bench under a blooming dogwood tree. Her program still folded in her hands, her heart unusually light. She thought back to a year ago, how heavy everything had felt. How bitter the truth had tasted. Now, the truth was still sharp. But she'd learned to carry it differently. That same month, Evelyn had accepted a position as a research assistant with a community health initiative focused on injury prevention in young athletes. The irony wasn't lost on her, that the injury which nearly ended her future had instead brought her right into the heart of her purpose. She visited local high schools, talked to teams about joint health, recovery, and the mental toll of long-term injury. She worked with physicians to develop educational materials for underfunded schools, places where kids like her once believed pain was a badge of honor, not a signal to stop. Sometimes, students came up to her after workshops and asked quiet questions. What if my coach doesn't believe me? What if my parents can't afford to take me to a doctor? Evelyn always gave them the same answer. Tell someone anyway. Keep telling. And don't stop until someone listens. You are not a cost. You are not an inconvenience. You are someone who matters. She wished someone had said that to her when she was 17. But now, she got to say it first. Her parents were changing too. They had started family counseling at Grandpa Henry's gentle push. Not every session was productive. But the effort was there now. The questions. The pauses. The awkward but real attempts to make room for conversations they once avoided. Her father still sometimes defaulted to silence. Her mother still tried to smooth over hard truths. But Evelyn no longer needed them to be different for her to feel whole. She had stopped trying to be seen. Because she had seen herself. That evening, Evelyn returned to Grandpa Henry's porch, her favorite quiet place. The swing still creaked the same way it always had. A glass of lemonade sat on the side table, condensation pooling beneath it. Henry joined her, a newspaper folded under his arm. I heard Arya was incredible today, he said as he sat. She was, Evelyn replied. She said things I never thought I'd hear her say. Bravery shows up in surprising places. So does healing, Evelyn added. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rustling of leaves and the far-off sound of a train. Then Henry turned to her. You know, Livy, there's something about your story that still amazes me. What's that? You didn't wait for anyone else to rescue you. And because of that, you ended up becoming the person others come to for rescue. She smiled. That's not what I set out to do. Maybe not, he said. But sometimes what breaks you also remakes you. Stronger. Wiser. Kinder. Evelyn looked out over the garden, the sky now streaked with violet and rose. I used to think I'd never forgive them. My parents. Arya. But I've realized, forgiveness isn't about forgetting what they did. It's about remembering who I want to be. Henry nodded, his eyes shining just a little. And who is that? She turned to him, the quiet wrapping around them like a soft blanket. Someone who doesn't need anyone to tell her she's enough.